and welcome to my new series, totally not inspired by the recent musings of Alyssa Goji Geek, Beyond the Brawl. In this series, I dive deeper into kaiju and toku movies and shows to discuss the themes behind them. As the first entry of this series, I can think of no better movie than Godzilla vs. Mothra from 1992, also known as Godzilla and Mothra: The Battle for Earth. Despite having seen a little bit of Rebirth of Mothra in 1997 and TriStar's Godzilla in 1999, both on TV, it wasn't until 2007 when I came across this movie on the Stars channel that I finally began to appreciate Godzilla and kaiju. So without further introduction, let's go beyond the, beam spams of Godzilla vs. Mothra and discuss the deeper themes. It's no secret that Godzilla vs. Mothra's plot is largely driven by an environmental message, in particular habitat destruction. The human antagonist is the president of the Marutomo Company, a development firm that had started working on Infant Island. While exploring, the protagonists remark that humans are destroying what nature has been building for thousands of years. This is quite true. It takes quite a while for nature to catch up after an area has been cleared of trees. Some countries balance this by planting 2 new trees for every 1 cut down, Sweden, and certainly there's an emphasis on planting trees in many countries. Habitat destruction can cause local extinctions as well as drive species to venture outside of their niche areas. This causes them to be considered invasive species in other areas and usually targeted for extermination as pests. This is a great disruption of the ecosystem, which is much more delicate than humans believe. Habitat destruction can be directly caused via logging and landscaping, or indirectly caused via accidental pollution or the removal of a key species, usually a predator, that causes the rest of the ecosystem to fall out of balance. In terms of habitat destruction's influence on Godzilla vs. Mothra's plot, we'll need to dig up info on the history of habitat destruction in Japan, preferably from the 80s and early 90s, or highlighting that decade in more recent articles. For this video, I'll bring up highlights from an article titled Natural Environments, Wildlife, and Conservation in Japan by Catherine Knight from January 25, 2010, on the website the Asia Pacific Journal Japan Focus, apjjf.org, linked article in the description. As for the source itself, from its About page, the Asia Pacific Journal Japan Focus is a peer-reviewed online publication providing critical analysis of the forces shaping the Asia Pacific and the world. The journal explores the geopolitics, economics, history, society, culture, international relations, and environment of the modern and contemporary Asia Pacific region. The journal itself was started in 2002. Habitat destruction became more common after World War II when Japan ramped up its modernization. Only a small percentage of Japan's forests as of 2010 were primeval forests. Roughly 40% of their forests were coniferous plantation forests, which is to say man-made via planting. Wetlands cover less than 1% of Japan's land area, but have been threatened by water pollution and reclamation projects. Most of their major rivers are modified with dams and other control constructs. Only 45% of the entire coastline, again as of 2010, is in its natural state. A report in 2005 found that 47% of Japan's lakes exceeded environmental standards in regard to pollution. 24% of coastal waters were overpolluted that same year. We can assume that these numbers were slightly lower, or higher in the case of natural forest cover, around the time Godzilla vs. Mothra was being written. Habitat loss and degradation is one of the 3 primary threats to Japan's natural environments and wildlife, along with poorly controlled hunting and introduced species competing in native species niches. Japan has 29 national parks, though the protections for these parks does not prohibit development, for example tourist buildings, which were actually encouraged by the 1987 resort law. Things may have changed in the decades since this article was published. Japan has had an issue with pollution of soil and waterways since World War II due to the increasing usage of agricultural chemicals. Fertilizer and pesticide is used much more often than in other OECD countries, in part because of Japan's hot and wet climate. This had decreased throughout the 90s, but likely played a small role in Godzilla vs. Mothra's environmental message. A recurring issue in Japan has been the conflict between development and conservation, development typically winning out. This was in part due to the Ministry of Construction, since renamed, having a disproportionate amount of sway in the government. The Ministry of the Environment was relatively weak in comparison, though that may have changed in the years since Godzilla vs. Mothra's release. Another factor was low public awareness of conservation and ecological issues. Japan had a high growth period in the 1980s and early 1990s. Development projects were pursued despite both economic and environmental costs, along with several other factors, to be fair. But reckless development was certainly a major concern and one Toho was right to highlight in this film. There's plenty of info in this article that I skipped as I wanted to highlight just a basic rundown of the elements that are apparent in Godzilla vs. Mothra, but I do encourage reading it if you're interested. Again, it is linked in the description. Man versus nature is another concept driving this film's plot. The Cosmos themselves admit that their ancient civilization attempted to control the world's climate. This led the Earth to react by creating Batra, the Black Mothra as he is referred to. But I'll talk more about Batra in his own segment. Segment, because he's a bug. Okay, back to serious discussion. In contrast with the last section, this will be a more abstract and broad discussion. Humans like to feel in control. This desire led us to add heating and air conditioning in our homes. We like living in a comfortable climate. This is also why popular small talk is complaining about the weather. We can never seem to be satisfied. It's too hot. It's too cold. Why does it have to rain today? I hate snow. The list can go on and on. I'm pretty sure most of our ideal conditions include being sunny, a comfortable temperature, and a slight breeze. The problem comes in when we want to force that ideal on the environment outside our living quarters. Now, we don't have the technology to directly influence the climate via some machine like the Cosmos civilization did, but we definitely do impact the environment around us. Logging, construction, pollution, these are all factors that play into humanity's impact on the surrounding environment. I'm not going to talk about humanity's contribution to climate change, as that was not really a plot point here. Plus, it's a divisive topic that I just don't want on this channel. Climate science itself is still in its infancy, and there are a lot of subsections of study which weirdly doesn't include geology as much as it should. In order to better understand current climate change, we must study past climate change. Humans are inherently afraid of change, and that's a factor in the fears of current climate change. Another factor in the man versus nature theme is the disruption of ecosystems via hunting, typically the overhunting and culling of other predator species. Humans are by far the apex predator on this planet. We're able to outcompete and kill sharks, whales, bears, wolves, lions, tigers, birds of prey, and more. Even predation at the top of the food chain disrupts the balance below it. A good example of this is the wolves of Yellowstone. Wolves were hunted to local extinction in Yellowstone, causing the deer, elk, and moose populations to grow out of control. That in turn harmed plant populations, which hurt populations lower down the food chain. In the last decade, wolves were reintroduced after population control efforts by humans failed. Almost overnight, and that's of course an exaggeration, the wolves culled the sick and weak herbivores. This restabilized Yellowstone's ecosystem to the flourishing national park we see today. The fight between man and nature can also be waged for more innocent reasons. Sweden was once in such desperate need of food and farmland that the country began draining lakes to grow crops and raise livestock. One of these lakes was Hornborgasjön. The problem here was that Hornborgasjön had become the designated spot for the common crane, also known as the Eurasian crane, to meet during mating season. Not wanting to force the birds to find a new breeding place and potentially destroy the population, a major restoration effort began. They flooded the area, and over time, waterfowl species began to return to the lake. Fish were also reintroduced, and today the lake once again has a healthy biodiversity. Restoration efforts still aren't done, and a recent effort is the construction of channels to promote the return of trout and similar fish, particularly for their mating season. These two stories highlight both humanity's need to control nature as well as our ability to recognize past deeds as mistakes and work with nature to restore balance. We are a strange species, to be sure. We must remember that humans are just as much a part of the natural order as every other species, and I think Godzilla vs. Mothra does well in highlighting both aspects of humanity. Batra is a more vindictive force of nature and became the natural enemy of Mothra, who protects all life unconditionally. Batra defends the Earth and its ecosystems first and will attack anything he deems to be a threat. This can be humans, Mothra for her compassion toward humans, and the asteroid that was on track to collide with Earth and destroy it. Batra fills a similar role to Godzilla in this film, as both are unstoppable forces of nature. However, where Godzilla is simply similar to a storm or volcanic eruption, Batra is a storm with consciousness. Hurricanes go where they go. Batra is a hurricane with a target in mind. So if both Batra and Godzilla are forces of nature, why did Batra see Godzilla as a threat? I'd say the answer is simple. Godzilla can be seen as an artificial creation of humanity that also disrupts the natural order. Despite Godzilla being an enemy of humans, Batra still sees him as a threat to Earth. Godzilla is still a metaphor for the atomic bomb in the Heisei movies. The Godzillasaurus was mutated in Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah from a crashed nuclear submarine leaking radiation in its vicinity. It's unclear, however, if Batra was against all forms of radiation or even nuclear power. Certainly radioactive minerals exist in nature, otherwise man-made radioactive objects wouldn't exist. We don't see Batra attack a nuclear power facility, only Godzilla. This doesn't necessarily mean that Batra is okay with man's use of nuclear energy. I would say that it merely means that Batra considers Godzilla to be the bigger threat between the two. That's about all I can say for the theme of Godzilla vs. Mothra. Godzilla takes a bit of a back seat in the conflict between Batra and Mothra and humanity. The environmental message still stands and is important for us all if we want to continue thriving with a diverse and healthy ecosystem. Personally, I don't think humanity will destroy the Earth. While it may not be a literal Batra, I think the Earth will take care of us long before that's a possibility. But we can and should take steps to avoid our own demise and learn to live in harmony with the natural order. Storms are going to come, volcanoes are going to erupt. Other species survive, and so can we. Thank you for watching. If you made it this far, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the themes behind Godzilla vs. Mothra. It's certainly not the most well-executed movie in terms of the acting, but I think the story is still good and the themes relevant today. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, show your support by hitting the like, rumble, or fire button depending on where you watch this. And then check out my other videos. If you like those, subscribe for future content.